Hey everyone, welcome back to the Phoenix's Tale. I am your host Gabe, and this week we are going to be talking about Chapter 12, Polyjuice Potion. So let's get to our recap. My notes just went wonky, give me a moment. The chapter opens with Harry being left alone momentarily in Dumbledore's office because after the attack on Justin Finch Fletchley and Nearly Headless Nick, Professor McGonagall thinks it's time for him to have Harry to have a chat with Professor Dumbledore. Harry meets Fawkes the Phoenix for the first time and discovers, quite surprisingly and shockingly, that Fawkes is a Phoenix. And that particular day was a burn day for Fawkes. So, not, considering what poor Harry was going through, probably quite a shock it was definitely quite a shock to him. But we also see Harry putting on the Sorting Hat to make sure that he was placed in the right house. And all he got from the Sorting Hat was, well, you would have done well in Slytherin. And, he takes the hat off and says, nope, you're wrong. So Dumbledore enters the office and he and Harry sit down to have a little bit of a chat. But Harry doesn't really tell him anything because he doesn't, I think, really know what to say, especially after what happened with the dueling club and what everybody is saying. And knowing that they are brewing the Polyjuice Potion probably illegally as a couple of second years. So Harry doesn't really say anything. So Christmas arrives and the castle is quite empty for a change because of the Chamber of Secrets being open again. And thankfully Malfoy, Crabbe, and Goyle are staying, so the Golden Trio get to use the Polyjuice Potion with minimal problems. And I say minimal. Things go well for Harry and Ron, and unfortunately all that they find out from Malfoy when they finally find their way to the Slytherin common room was that Malfoy is not behind the Chamber of Secrets being open again. Poor Hermione, however, finds out, much to her detriment, that the hair on her robes that she thought was Millicent Bulstrode's that she was going to use for the Polyjuice Potion was actually cat hair. And the Polyjuice Potion is not meant for anything other than human transformation. So Hermione's in the hospital wing, looking like a cat. And, that's where we kind of leave things for this chapter. As always, it is the first episode of the month. In this case, we are in the month of December, and we do have a couple of birthdays to celebrate. We have 3. So I want to wish a very happy birthday to one of my favorite characters in the entire series, Hagrid. How can you not love Hagrid? So happy birthday to Hagrid on December 6th. To Charlie Weasley on December 12th, and don't necessarily want to wish a happy birthday to this one, but the Chief Death Eater, if you will, it's a term that comes up later, Tom Riddle, aka Voldemort, on the 31st, New Year's Eve. I'm not wishing him a happy birthday, but happy birthday to Hagrid and Charlie nonetheless. So, as someone who has recently learned that she is autistic, I've been learning a lot about masking and the struggle that it is for so many autistics when it comes to unmasking. So we're going to start with some key points of this first. And as you might imagine, with this chapter being all about the Polyjuice Potion and the effects of it when Harry and Ron take the potion, that was the first thing that came to mind. So this is what we're talking about this week. Autistic masking. This is not anything that is unique only to autistics. A lot of people mask for a lot of different reasons. The mechanisms of it are pretty much the same. So if you recognize yourself in what we're going to talk about this week, then hopefully I'll have some information toward the end of the episode to help you out with that, because this is something I'm learning on doing myself here in real time, is the unmasking process. So there's quite a lot, actually. Masking and alternative personas. And here's some talking points that I have. So what is masking? Masking is the conscious or unconscious act of hiding or altering one's true feelings, behaviors, or identity to fit social expectations or to protect oneself emotionally. So you people pleasers out there are masking. And the source of that people pleasing, like I said, masking is really ubiquitous. I mean, you see it with all sorts of people. It is not unique to being autistic. Some of the reasons for masking are avoiding judgment, rejection, or discrimination. Masking also helps those of us who do it to help navigate social or professional settings, or as a survival mechanism, especially in environments where vulnerability is risky. The impact on one's self-concept. Prolonged masking can blur the distinction between the authentic self and the persona one projects, leading to confusion or conflict about personal identity. The emotional consequences. While masking can provide immediate social safety, it may contribute to stress, anxiety, or feelings of emptiness due to the suppression of one's true identity. Neurodivergence and masking. People who are autistic or have other neurodivergent conditions often engage in masking to conform to neurotypical social norms, which can lead to exhaustion and mental health challenges. This is where my struggle with masking, or more specifically unmasking, comes in, because I have a whole host of childhood traumas because of my verbally abusive father, where, I'm hypervigilant, people pleasing. And then you add being autistic and being weird and different on top of all that. It's been really quite a challenge getting to the heart of who am I really and what do I want from my life. Because so much of what I thought I wanted from my life, I have uncovered over the last year and a half, over maybe 2 years, that I have been aware that, yeah, I'm autistic. It's not been easy. I'm not going to lie. It's not been easy. Let's talk about the social identity versus personal identity. Masking involves shifting focus from personal identity, in other words, who someone really is, to social identity, such as, whatever roles or appearances that are accepted by others. The easiest one would be your job. What is your role in that job? What is your place in the hierarchy of the organization? All these things, can lead to adapting or adopting, or both, social identity for job roles, etc. And this highlights the tension between the inner self and the external expectations, which is where I've really been trying hard to do the work to figure out who I am, what I want my life to look like, versus what I have been programmed to think, because I have masked so hard throughout my life because of my childhood trauma and my autism. So the fluidity of identity is adopting alternative Adopting alternative personas reveals how identity can be dynamic, situational, and constructed rather than fixed, raising questions about authenticity and self-acceptance. My brain just did not want to put the right emphasis on that. Risks of misidentification. Adopting another's persona, in this case, let's look at the Polyjuice part of the chapter, can lead to loss of self, ethical dilemmas, and the risk of being lost in the role, impacting mental well-being. This, to me, is making decisions about how you act, how you dress, all of these things based on what somebody else is doing. And this is not uncommon. In fact, this is very common for children with the childhood trauma, childhood abuse, etc., etc. And I found myself doing this a lot with certain friends in my life, especially if they were friends that my dad knew somewhat, and had some exposure to. There was always, I felt the approval toward, this friend that I wasn't getting. So I had to be more like her. This is, fully, doing your best to take on certain aspects of somebody else instead of just figuring out and standing up and saying, oh, I don't like this, or I don't like that, or I don't want to be like that. That person's getting the approval. Well, then if I want to get the approval, then I need to be more like this person, or I need to be more like that person. That's where I feel that comes in, is when somebody is masking so hard that they're looking to actual, for lack of a better term, role models, to hopefully be more like somebody else to get the approval. So, some therapeutic perspectives. Counseling approaches often focus on helping individuals explore authentic self-expression, reduce compulsive masking, and build environments of acceptance. And then in cultural and historical contexts, masking has been used throughout history in various cultures as performance art, social survival, or ritual, demonstrating its complex role in human psychology. So, in essence, masking is a coping strategy that is not exclusive to autistic individuals, as I mentioned earlier, but it is seen across various neurodivergent conditions, if you will, as well as in neurotypical people who have experienced trauma, abuse, etc. So, we're going to look at how masking appears beyond autism, and more specifically, its relationship with trauma, because I don't want to simply talk about my perspective on things. I want to be all-inclusive with the information that I give you as I'm researching my episodes each week. So, masking across neurodivergent types. We often see masking, other than in autistics, also in people with ADHD or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Individuals with ADHD often mask symptoms such as impulsivity, hyperactivity, or inattentiveness to meet social expectations. They may develop strategies to appear more organized or focused, but at the cost of mental fatigue and a lot of stress. We also see masking a lot in those with sensory processing disorder, or SPD. People with sensory sensitivities may mask by suppressing natural reactions to sensory input in order to blend into sensory environments that overwhelm them, causing internal stress despite an outward appearance of calm. For me, the one that just popped into my head as I was saying those words to you are going to a concert. This was many, many years ago, probably going on close to 20 years ago. And I was out with a bunch of friends because there was a concert at one of the casinos where I lived in California, the Native American casinos. And it was an 80s cover band thing, and they were really good, actually. And it was a fun night. But in a situation like that, where this came in for me, being autistic and being highly sensitive to noise and how chaotic music can be for me with the lights and how dark it is and just all of the things that makes a concert just an amazing experience for most people, I don't like doing that. I cannot stand to be in a situation where I cannot hear somebody talking in my ear. They have to shout in my ear just to be heard. That it's too much for me. And yeah, it causes a lot of internal distress on my part, because I'm masking the fact that I was masking the fact that I hate environments like that. Even though I was with friends, it was a fun time. We were dancing a lot. The band was really good. There was an aspect of that I didn't like. And so I was masking the fact that I fucking hate this. So I just stayed focused on, the parts of it that I liked. I liked the music. I liked the friends I was with. I loved being out on the dance floor dancing and having a good time. So that I can guarantee you that if you asked every single one of those friends that I was with that night, they would say, oh no, she was having a good time. And, they would have no clue that I absolutely hate environments like that, where it's going to be loud, noisy, crowded, hot, usually stinky, because you get a lot of bodies crammed into a space. You know what I mean? Those with anxiety disorders. Those with anxiety frequently mask their internal worry or panic by portraying calm, confidence, or sociability. This can involve controlling body language, speech, and facial expressions. I've done that a lot. The various mood disorders, such as depression and bipolar disorder. Individuals may hide mood fluctuations or depressive symptoms to avoid the stigma or maintain functionality, which is a form of emotional masking. And then, last but not least, we have PTSD. PTSD sufferers often mask by suppressing trauma responses or dissociative symptoms to seem normal, especially in social or professional settings. So let's take a look now at masking and enduring trauma for a neurotypical individual. So, masking can come in the following forms for neurotypical individuals. 1, adaptive survival strategy. For neurotypical people who endure trauma such as abuse, neglect, or outright discrimination, masking may arise as a survival mechanism, concealing true emotions or vulnerabilities to avoid further harm or rejection. Emotional suppression. Trauma can teach individuals to suppress or hide feelings such as fear, sadness, or anger, leading to habitual masking patterns that protect from emotional overwhelm. Social camouflage. To maintain relationships, employment, or safety, trauma survivors often develop personas or facades that mask inner struggles, reinforcing a disconnection between their outer facade and inner experience. And it goes a little bit into the risks of masking post-trauma. Chronic masking following trauma can result in exhaustion, identity fragmentation, difficulty in trusting others, and increased risk of mental health concerns like anxiety and depression. So let's look at the common psychological themes here. Oh, identity conflict. Whether you're autistic, whether you're another neurodivergent type we just talked about, or if you're neurotypical and you're masking because of the trauma, here's some common themes with masking for all of us. Identity conflict is the first one. Masking often creates internal tension between the authentic self, and the presented self, regardless of neurotype or trauma history. The second common aspect to masking for all of us is the need for acceptance. The drive to mask is often motivated by a fundamental human need to belong and be accepted into their social group or community, whichever, especially in environments that are unaccepting or hostile. And then the long-term effects is something else that we all share. While masking can be temporarily protective, over time it will impair self-esteem, authenticity, and emotional well-being, which then makes healing and self-acceptance vital. Okay? Because the long-term effects, let me tell you, figuring this shit out when I was 52 years old, I am now 54 years old. So I'm only 2 years into understanding myself as somebody who's autistic, working on helping myself deal with the trauma that I've dealt with in my life. It does over time impair one's self-esteem, authenticity, and emotional well-being. And that's why healing and self-acceptance is absolutely vital for everybody working on unmasking, if you're at that point. So, in summary, masking is a widespread psychological phenomenon employed by diverse individuals, neurodivergent and neurotypical alike, particularly when navigating social expectations amid diversity or trauma. And the easiest way for me to understand this concept initially was to think of it as not being yourself in a given situation, often as a way to protect yourself. That's why we mask. We're protecting ourselves from something that is just too much for us to deal with. As a result, we have all these issues with self-esteem and, our self-worth. And, we know when we're not being authentic with somebody or in a given situation, and it just keeps building and building and building and building until the patient gets to the point where, I'm done. I want to let it all go and I just want to be myself. But more often than not, we have to go through the process of figuring out who the hell we are and what the hell we want without anybody else's expectations. And for somebody like me who has been masking essentially my entire life, it's a difficult process. And this is the reason why I immediately thought of this and felt so connected to this particular chapter, because I am currently learning all of the ways throughout my life that I have masked. It's not as simple as, being a people pleaser and trying to gain my father's approval of me. There's a lot of different aspects and nuances to masking that, it's going to take a while, because it's going to take a while for you to be brutally honest with yourself, to get to that point where this is not who I am. This is how I would rather react in this situation, but I'm getting ahead of myself. So learning all the ways in which I have masked. So let's take a look at the list of ways people mask. And I'll expand on a few as we're going through, because several of these did resonate strongly with me. And that's the whole point of this podcast, is to kind of share my story with you. So I'll expand on some of those. People mask in a variety of ways beyond not standing up for themselves, or beyond agreeing to things that they don't want to do. Masking is so much more than that. And here are some of the common masking behaviors that are often seen in real life. Okay. 1, altering communication. changing tone of voice, using rehearsed phrases, forcing eye contact, or mimicking social behaviors to fit in socially. Yeah, I have to force eye contact a lot. Another one, suppressing natural behaviors, such as hiding, stimming. We're not going to go too deep into what stimming is, but stimming is basically anything you do that helps regulate your nervous system and calms you down. For somebody with autism, with somebody with a more severe case of autism, you'll see a lot of hand flapping or a lot of rocking. For me, one of my stims is picking out the little blisters that happen on my fingers and peeling the skin on my fingers. I know. Fidgeting. My cousin was, and I highly suspect she's ADHD, but we don't talk anymore, so I don't know. But I remember as a child and as a teenager, she would be in, a recliner, but it would be a rocking one. And boy, she would just rock that fucker thing, that fucking thing, just constantly. And it's like, how can you stand that when you're watching something on television or, it's just, but for her, that was a stim. I mean, I see it so clearly now. So suppressing those types of things, suppressing any fidgeting or controlling facial expressions or body language. Okay. People pleasing. Laughing at jokes that you don't find funny. Agreeing to plans that you don't want to join in on. Or not expressing your true feelings simply as a way to avoid conflict or rejection. And this is a big one. A few episodes back, I discussed what social situations were like with my father after he and my mother divorced. And in that discussion, I mentioned how good my brothers and I had got with coming up with what our father wanted to hear. We got good at lying, basically, and saying things in a way that a simple, oh, that sounds awful, I don't want to do that, I don't want to go to this event, was never good enough for my father. So if you could say, I don't want to go because, and you had a good enough reason, that's what I'm talking about. We would come up with something that we knew would avoid all the yelling and the insults and all the shit that my father used to do. Okay. So my brothers and I got really good at that. In fact, that was one of the first things about myself that I began working on after my epiphany moment about my father and not being a priority to him. I've talked about that in depth, and I know I will further on because we'll circle back to a lot of these things. But realizing that I was, as my father's child, I was not a priority to him. My brothers and I were not a priority to him. There was always something or someone more important to him. And that came through very clearly with his behaviors and his actions towards us. So, yeah, I would put that learning to be good at lying, to give my father a logical excuse that he couldn't argue against. So we didn't have to hear the insults. We didn't have to hear the shouting. We didn't have to hear, whatever was coming out of his mouth. We could avoid that by saying, I don't want to go. I've been throwing up all day. I just want to go to bed, and playing the part well. And it often required, confirmation from one another. So my brothers and I, that is one thing I remember we were good at. We always had each other's backs with that. Hey, I told him, my brother would come to me, hey, I told him blah blah blah. Okay, I got you. Like, no, dude, he has been throwing up all day, or whatever. Um, Emotional concealment, putting on a happy face despite feeling sad, anxious, or overwhelmed inside, hiding panic or worry for fear of any judgment. Another way we see masking in real life is social camouflage, preparing topics before having conversations with somebody, mirroring another's energy or mannerisms, and using scripted responses to navigate interactions. How many of you out there, when you have to make a phone call that you really don't want to make, but you have to make the phone call, rehearse what you're going to say before you get on the phone? Yeah, that's masking. Sensory masking, enduring uncomfortable sensory stimuli, like bright lights and loud noises at that concert, while hiding discomfort to avoid standing out. Another way that I do this for myself is I do sleep with a sleep mask on, because I need my bedroom very dark and as cold as possible without freezing to death to get a good night's sleep. I also carry, oh, they're over there, but I also carry a set of earbuds that I keep charged up, and it's on a little keychain. So it's with my keys. So when I go to Costco once a month, and I'll get a slice of pizza and a soda for lunch after I've done my shopping, I'll put my earbuds in and scroll TikTok or listen to an audiobook while I have my lunch, because I don't want to deal with all the noise and all the people, and so that's another way that you can mask. And unmasking for me in that sense is going ahead and doing that anyway. Yeah, I have no problem being in a public place with my earbuds in if there's something that is too much for me. Another way you see masking in the real world is avoidance or withdrawal. So, making excuses to be alone. At work, at my last job in California before we moved, it was an office setting at a hospital, so kind of corporate. Extra bathroom breaks, I started doing that a lot, pretending to be busy. There's a long story there. But making excuses to be alone, to manage overwhelm without alerting others. And I did that a lot with certain jobs that I've had over the years, as I've just said. I should just stick with my notes for my talking points, because I always get ahead of myself. When I worked retail, I would hide out in the back room where our stock was. And this was my first retail job, so I was like early 20s at this point. And luckily at the time, this was a bigger store. So think Target before all the grocery stuff came in. Okay. When I worked retail, I would hide out in the back room where our stock was for my department. I was in, I don't even know what they call it, but it was where like the bath towels and the bedding and, all that kind of stuff was. So being a bigger store, I was able to hang out in our stock area where the items for my department was stored, and just keep an ear open for anybody coming upstairs, which was very easy. Making sure to answer my pages regularly, hit the floor a couple times, but I could just basically hang out there and just be alone for a while. So it was very easy to pretend that I was pulling stock to fill the empty spots on the shelves. Because I couldn't stand being in that environment. Who can stand retail? Seriously. But had I known all this before, I'm seeing it now as something that, oh, yeah, I'm definitely autistic. I probably shouldn't have had that job, because it was just all wrong for me. I had all these expectations. I already masked heavily at that point anyway. So let's put me in a bright store with bitchy managers and shit customers, and get me the fuck out of here. I'm hiding in the back where our stock is. And so if anybody comes looking for me or whatever, oh, I'm just doing stuff here. You know, I've got some empty spots on the shelves and they didn't know. So compensatory effort. I'm going to try to explain these things as best as I can. But compensatory efforts show up in real life as putting extra effort into appearing normal or competent and hiding how much harder tasks or socializing are to avoid stigma. This one took me back to junior high, which is often a nightmare for many of us, just on the surface of it. Junior high just sucks. You know, most of us are hitting puberty about that time, and things are, you know, shifting to the whole, you know, who's popular, who's not. Anyway, but for me, this would be post-divorce. My parents' divorce would be the most difficult time, and probably the worst period of time for me was junior high school. So it drastically altered what was already a nightmare for most of us, and just, you know, made it even worse. And I'm going to explain a little bit on this one. So, for example, to this day, I can still hear, I remember my bedroom. I remember how my bedroom was set up. I remember how the house was laid out. And I can still hear my mom's sobs as she would cry herself to sleep, wondering how she was going to keep food on the table and a roof over our heads, because things went from bad to worse financially for us after my parents' divorce. And I would often look around, you know, the next morning after hearing my mother cry herself to sleep, and I would look around at my fellow female classmates and think that they were absolutely fucking stupid. You know, they're worrying about shit that means absolutely nothing at the end of the day. And again, as a female, worrying about hair, makeup, clothes, who's popular, who isn't, who's dating whom, all of that shit to me was stupid beyond belief, because there is so many more serious things in life to worry about based on the environment I was living in at the time. Okay, I knew what the financial struggle was for my mom. She was working 3 jobs at one time, and my asshole father, who had court-ordered child support he had to pay, only paid $600 a month. That didn't even cover the rent on the house that we were in. And not $600 per child. That was $200 per child, $600 total. And my mom's still working 3 jobs on top of that. And my father was always late. It was rough financially. We were literally millimeters away from being homeless at that point. So yeah, the compensatory effort, I don't even remember, but I remember feeling like wanting to wear makeup and having my hair a certain way. You know, this is what you're supposed to do, apparently, when you're a young 12, 13, 14 junior high girl. This is what you're supposed to do, and this is what you're supposed to worry about. But all this other shit's happening over here. So for me, those compensatory efforts were, again, I'm autistic. I was just trying to be normal. But I was also, in my own way, trying to feel normal in a situation that was beyond normal. It was so not normal to worry about, are we going to have enough to eat? Are we going to get kicked out of our house? Are we going to have to go live with that asshole? Because the only way my mom can make this work is she lives with friends. which means we'd have to live with my dad. It was a lot. Anyway, another way we see this play out in real life is role playing, adopting different personas depending on context, such as at work versus with family, to fit expectations. And then suppressing opinions or needs, not voicing personal opinions, desires, or boundaries. And this is the one that I expect will be the most difficult for me as I continue on my unmasking journey. Due to the hyper independence developed from my childhood trauma, mixing with my autistic traits, asking for help, sharing with others what helps and what doesn't when interacting with me, that's going to be more difficult for me. So we'll see, and I'll keep reporting back as I'm working through this. So these behaviors can vary widely depending on individual circumstances, neurotype, and environment, but they share the goal of blending in, avoiding negative consequences, and or protecting vulnerable parts of ourselves. And masking is often exhausting. It is absolutely fucking exhausting, and can lead to emotional distress if sustained without support or opportunity for authentic expression. I spoke last week, I believe, about, or maybe it was an episode I was working on today. Either way, it's a good story as far as wanting to help myself. Because I was thinking earlier today about how many people don't seek help, as far as therapy, who can access therapy. Okay. They've got the insurance, they got the money, whatever. And one of the mantras that has developed and stuck in my head, and has been there for a very, very long time, as long as I can remember, is I don't like feeling like this about myself. And doing what I can to feel better. And I do that because I don't have that support. And even now, with my family, I kind of feel like I don't have an opportunity for authentic expression. There's a lot that I don't say to my mom or to my brother. There's a lot I don't share with them. There's a lot that I still put up with them. I could use the excuse that it's because of my circumstances. If I tried to make it on my own right now, I don't have a job, I don't have income. I would be homeless because I don't, I have the financial support here, but I don't have the emotional support. So there's a lot that I still hold back and I still don't say, but in my own way, I'm also working on boundaries. One of the things that I have stopped doing is nagging my mom to do stuff around here, like calling the plumber to fix her kitchen sink, getting her car in to get the crack on the windshield fixed before it gets into winter, and we are expecting snow tomorrow as I am recording this. It's her car. It's her kitchen. It's her money. It's not my responsibility to keep after her with those things. So I don't do it anymore. That's one way that I am setting boundaries and starting to test the waters. I just stopped. It's not my responsibility to do all that. If it were my kitchen, if it were my car and my money, then yes, that is my responsibility. But it is not my responsibility to take care of my mother with those things when she is perfectly capable. She just doesn't do it. And we'll talk more about learned helplessness, but that's where I would put her behaviors with that, is learned helplessness, because I've done it for decades. Now I'm not doing it anymore. She leaves the bag of cheese on the counter that should be in the refrigerator. This happened several months ago. And it was a bag of that pre-shredded cheese. She was making a big pan of macaroni and cheese. I think it's why she had the cheese out. And, she didn't seal up the bag and put it in the refrigerator. I left it there. It's not my job to clean up after her. The number of times she leaves fucking empty cat food cans on the counter instead of throwing it away, I leave the empty can there. And then I'll go get the new one. And it's just irritating to me all the way around. So, yes, masking is exhausting. Yes, it leads to emotional distress if it is sustained for a long period of time, such as it's been with me. And I've not had the support or a lot of opportunity for authentic expression. But I'm doing what I can do. Again, not as an excuse, but it is a decision I've made to just kind of lay low. Any of my plans moving forward as this podcast progresses, as I get past whatever mental barrier I have about the social media side of this and can maybe start monetizing my social media account, finding ways to create an income for myself. When I start doing that, my personal plans, telling them to my family, specifically my mother and my brother, will be on an on a need to know basis. There we go. It was stuck in my brain for a while. So that's going to wrap things up for me this week. But before we do, as promised, I'm looking at my notes. Yeah, I do have some things that can help if you, like me, are struggling with that and working on unmasking yourself. So let's go through those real quick. But I do want to say here, and I will say this anytime I give advice like this. Number one, I am not a therapist. I do have a bachelor's degree in psychology, but I am not yet ready to pursue education more. It's coming. I love school. I love education. I love learning more. So I will be returning to school eventually, but I'm not ready to yet. And what I am sharing with you are some suggestions that I have used myself, but these are also some practical things that you can do for yourself as a stopgap measure. As always, I will always encourage you to seek proper professional help with a licensed mental health provider. Okay? So these are just stopgap measures. So some things you could do to help yourself unmask is starting a private journal. Writing down your feelings, thoughts, your true reactions to things without censorship. For example, if I were going to be doing something like this, I could, say, oh, I had such and such situation with my mom, and this is how I handle it. This is how I wanted to react to it. And then write that out. That's what that part means. Write down your true reactions to things without censorship. Start getting used to expressing those in any way you can. Okay? That seemed to be the gist of how I understood this. As far as using a journal to express those reactions that you really wanted to give. Because this is a safe space. That will be a safe space for you to start building your self-awareness on where you mask and how you mask. And it helps build a way to express yourself authentically, away from any judgment. That's the key. Is expressing these things that you really want to express without any judgment. Start practicing small, authentic acts, such as not putting the open bag of shredded cheese that has been on the counter for a couple hours in the fridge when it's my mom's cheese, my mom's kitchen. My mom's refrigerator, just, nope, I'm not doing it. She left it out. She can put it away. She can deal with it spoiling, whatever. So, small moments of being honest about preferences or feelings with trusted people. A lot of you hopefully you have somebody that you trust where you can go to them and say, hey, I'm working on unmasking and I'm working on these things. Can I be honest with you about something? I don't like this, or I don't like, start small, start there. Again, you can revert back to the journal because there's no judgment in that. But start with trusted people if you have anybody like that. So saying no to a minor request, for example, or sharing a personal opinion about something, that could also help. Mindful check-ins, self check-ins. Simple mindfulness exercises to help you notice when you're masking. So, for example, noticing tension in your body, noticing any feelings of exhaustion that you have, any mental disconnection that you might be having, or any thoughts you might be having about performing socially. Start being aware. And this one, I wish I had some tricks on, for you on this, because I always seem to get to the point when I'm on the verge of having a panic attack when it comes to noticing tension in my body. The feelings of exhaustion, it takes a couple days for me to notice. Again, I talked about this last week, working through my trauma whilst trying to be productive in something that I want to do that will hopefully get me back on my feet financially. I'll have 2 or 3 good days where I just knock out the writing, the research, recording, editing my podcast. And then, after those, 2 or 3 days, then I am just completely wiped out. And it takes a couple days for me to notice, oh, okay, we're back in this again. This one I am actively working on right now, and it is still very new and very strange to me. So, I get that this one is going to be more difficult, is, turning that attention inward and noticing that tension. Noticing those feelings of exhaustion or feeling disconnected. And noticing when you're performing, when you're amongst a group of people in any way. Another thing you can do is start setting boundaries gradually. Practice setting gentle boundaries in low-stakes situations to protect energy and build confidence in asserting needs. I think that's where I would put what I've started doing, and not, cleaning up after my mother, not pushing her to do the things that she needs to do. It's not my car, it's not my decision. Whatever. Creating a safe circle. Identify 1 or 2 people who are supportive and non-judgmental with whom you can begin to lower your mask. Again, this one for me is going to take a while because I don't have that in my life right now. But a lot of you hopefully will have just one person. Again, these are stopgap measures. So obviously take any of these things to therapy if you are in therapy, or you can get into therapy to help you with the unmasking. But until then, do what you can to create a safe circle. For me at this point, I don't have one. Celebrate small wins. Reinforce and celebrate any moment of authentic expression, no matter how small, to boost your motivation. The first time I walked away from my mother leaving something on the counter that should have been, put back in the refrigerator a couple hours ago, that is exactly what I did. I just sat here and I'm like, it's not my problem. It's not my problem. If it were my problem, then I would have put the food back in the refrigerator, but it's not my problem. And hooray for me for doing that. Always add the hooray for me. Celebrate it. Use creative outlets and engage in art, music, movement of any kind. So dancing, exercising, whatever it is, as ways to express parts of yourself that feel hidden or suppressed. I was a runner for a while. I got into running just before my trauma event. About 6 months before my trauma event, I got into running. And I've been doing that for a while. I haven't lately because 1, I'm in my 50s. 2, I'm a bit overweight. And 3, when you combine those with broken down running shoes, they're great for doing my walks. But I am not going to harm my body by running in shoes that I shouldn't be running in because they've been too broken down and, can cause some problems. So that's why runners who, run every day or run at least 3 times a week, who run consistently, basically, you'll see them go through a lot of shoes. That's why. But as a runner, when I am, years ago when I was signing up to actually run a 5K or run a 10K, I can't train with other people because at the same time, those times outside or that time on the treadmill, that is my Zen time. That is time for me. I'm listening to a podcast. I'm, just enjoying being outside in nature. That is me time. So makes those creative outlets your me time too. Running isn't very creative, or walking at this point isn't very creative, but it's the movement. You got to move. So dance, whatever exercise you want to do it. I'm not saying you have to be a runner. I'm not saying you have to lift weights, which is what my Beachbody On Demand program is. I prefer the weights. Just move. If you don't want to do those things, but Zumba sounds like fun to you, do Zumba. Great. That's what I'm saying. I need to work on this one. Limit social media exposure. And I'll go a step further and say, make your social media exposure intentional. Follow the people who you learn from, who lift you up in some way. There are a few on TikTok that I follow who have been amazing at learning more, that have helped me learn more about myself and what it means to be autistic. Okay, that kind of thing. So be more intentional with the social media you consume and limit your social media exposure because, let me tell you, over Labor Day weekend, I had to unfollow every single one of the political content creators I was following at the time. Whether it was the independent ones, and I'm thinking of people like Hawk, the TikTok lawyer, or, who's another one that I see on TikTok a lot? Mr. Global. And then you've got those who are doing it more for the journalistic. So Midas Touch, Aaron Parnas, and even the political, the individuals, the AOC, Kamala Harris, Eric Swalwell, any and all political content creator, I unfollowed. I haven't blocked them, but I have unfollowed them, and I don't see that content so much anymore because I couldn't take it anymore. Just the onslaught, the daily doom scrolling of all this political content and all the shit going on in the world, all the shit going on here in the United States. I could not take it anymore. So I intentionally unfollowed all of them. That's where I think you need to go on that. Limiting your social media exposure. Not necessarily politics per se, but you know what I mean. I unfollowed them and have been more intentional about, sticking with anybody talking about autism, anybody talking about Harry Potter, anybody talking about, or anybody who makes me laugh. A lot of you out there probably know a content creator called Rockstar. He's the one that does all those funny animal voiceover videos. You know, I need things that make me laugh. I need things that, you know, really interest me and shift my focus. That's what I mean about being intentional with social media. And in limiting that, you know, contact, even with the stuff that I enjoy watching, has made a huge difference over the last couple months for me. So, another thing you could do is practice compassionate self-talk. Replace self-criticism about not fitting in with acceptance and understanding of masking as a coping tool. Visualize your authentic self. Use guided imagery or visualization exercises. This is where I talked about last week. I talked about my fantasy journal to help me get ideas out of my head. But the fantasy journal is about the, you know, ideal, what do I want my life to look like over the next few months? And I write about it as if it's already happened. I need to wrap this up. But whatever it is that helps you imagine what being fully authentic looks like, feels like, as your own motivation toward unmasking. So start doing what it takes. A vision board, if that helps you. And then developing a personal mantra. Creating and powerful affirmations such as, I am enough as I am, to counteract the fear of rejection. I am enough. Or in my case, I don't like feeling like this. I don't like feeling like this about life in general. I don't like feeling like this about myself. So how do we fix the problem? Whatever works for you, again. So hopefully I've given you enough that's accessible for you for right now and low risk to begin easing the burden of masking until you can get that professional help that you need. And, you know, with somebody who can provide deeper healing and support. So that does it for me this week. Next week, we're going to be diving into chapter 13, The Very Secret Diary. Until then, please do not put animal hair into your Polyjuice Potion. Make sure it's human, okay? We don't want to end up in the hospital wing looking like a cat like Hermione did. So anyway, thank you for being with me this week. Again, hopefully what I gave you will help you if you're struggling right now, especially with the unmasking. So have a wonderful week, and I'll see you next week to talk about The Very Secret Diary. Have a good one.